thank you very much for coming in. Definitely not the kind of day that you probably are thinking a lot about landscaping, but it's always good to start planning early. My name is John Stottleman. I'm a landscape designer with Bachman's Landscaping. I'm one of 11 designers at Bachman's. We do design of all types of projects and then also the installation as well. So some of the things that we work on might include such elaborate projects as pools, putting greens, entire yards, small foundation plantings, and today we're going to talk about patios. Most homes in Minnesota have some type of outdoor entertaining space, whether it be a deck, patio, or combination of the two. It's important to have that space so that when we have months like this, the 3, 4, 5 months a year, hopefully more, that we can get outside and enjoy them, whether it be for dining, just relaxing, fire pits, socializing, you may have it. If anybody has questions along the way, feel free to speak up. I'm going to go through a couple just introduction slides here, and then we're going to just start looking at projects. So we've got about 40 different patios to look at today. Hopefully you see something you might like, just some ideas that might fit for your house, just a wide range of things, all different price ranges, and we can talk a little bit about that if you have questions on how some different things might fit in or how it might compare to other options. So feel free to ask questions. The three main types of patios that we're going to talk about are going to be your poured concrete patios, pavers, whether they're concrete or clay, and then also the natural stone patios. So if you starting in the poured concrete column there, typically you can have just your plain concrete like what you see on your average sidewalk, driveway type of thing, or stamped to add a little bit more interest to it, and then those could both have color. In most cases, that's going to be your lowest cost patio. There are fewer design options because there's limitations with what you can do in that few minutes that you have working with wet concrete before it starts to form up. So you've got some limitations there. As far as repairs go, it's pretty hard to do. Once poured concrete cracks, it's going to be forever. When concrete sinks, you can do some mud jacking, but then you've got some little holes, I don't know if you've seen that, to level it back out, but that is just, it's kind of a flaw ends up being a permanent thing there. So there's a little bit of a drawback to that, especially with our climate. The ground moves here no matter what we do. That's why they put footings for a house down 4 feet. When you're doing a poured concrete patio, you always want to have some extra reinforcement in it, like the rebar. Even putting base underneath it is a step that's often skipped, but doing a compacted base underneath it is important. Certain types of poured concrete do require sealing to keep that color up. If you're using a stamped concrete patio, it's not exactly low maintenance, because if you don't do that sealing every couple of years, you're going to lose some of that finish. And then typically you're going to have a consistent surface. Chairs are going to fit on it real smooth, no issues there. If you need to shovel it in the winter, running a shovel across it is no problem. And then in the Minnesota climate, there are no permeable options. So if you've heard of anything about permeable pavement, what it is it actually allows water to infiltrate down through a patio and into the ground so that you don't have the runoff. It's a newer technology, if you want to call it that, getting more important with groundwater issues and runoff issues, but the best options, if you're looking at a permeable for what our climate is, are going to be in the paver option. So you step over to the middle column there with pavers. In most projects, that's going to be your middle price point between the poured concrete and a natural stone patio. There's a wide range that you could have within that. The material cost on some concrete pavers might be as low as $2 a square foot, and then you're going to have other concrete pavers that are going to be up in closer to the $7, $8, $9 a square foot. There's some differences there in what you see as the surface finish as well as the texture, and then just the uniqueness of the design, that it costs more for those manufacturers to do. So on most of them, the labor is going to be the same no matter what the patio material actually is. It's just that actual paver can be more expensive or more economical. In terms of repairability, if there's a spot that settles, it's pretty easy to pull up a few pavers, recompact some material underneath there, and put things back down. You could do that 20, 30, 40 years down the road and still have a nice surface without having to do a total repair. The other piece of repairability it sometimes happens with patios is if you've got your grill on it, you drip some grease from the grill onto it and you have a stain there. A lot of times after your patio project is finished, the landscaper should leave a few extra pavers along just in case that happens in the future, or in case something needs to be repaired, that you can swap that paver or a couple pavers out that have those grease spots on it and put them back in place. So you have that option with pavers. In pavers, a lot of people worry about running a shovel across it, but it actually is a very consistent surface. There is a little bit of texture to many of the pavers, but putting a shovel, snowplow, snowblower on them, very rarely are you going to have any issues. And then, like I said, the permeability is an option there. When it comes to natural stone, usually it's going to be your highest cost patio in terms of both labor and material. And so that is something to consider in that case. There's many design options, combinations of stones, things that you can do to create some uniqueness out of those. Like the pavers, you could always pull a few sunken ones up if that is the case and replace it. And stone, while it gets some silt and dust on it in time, 20 years down the road, you could usually clean a piece of stone up to look like it did on day one. Whereas some of the concrete products, they're going to have some fading, just natural degradation. Stone, it's been around for a million years, that it's just been dug out of the ground and put into your yard. Cleaning it up 20 years down the road, it probably looks as good as day one. In both the paver and natural stone, sealing is optional. Usually it's not a requirement, but it can add a little bit of pop of color to some of those patios. And then with natural stone, one big drawback is because you are dealing with a natural stone material, there's a little bit more irregularity to it. Whether it's flagstone, or we'll look at some other types that are called cut and patterned, there is just that natural element to it. So running a shovel across it can be a little more difficult, as well as if you've got chairs, the chairs that we have in this room with the 4 points. A lot of times on a natural stone patio, it's hard to get all 4 points to sit consistently. Even if it's an expert installer doing things, you know, as best as possibly can be done, that stone just tends to have a little bit more irregularity. So when you're out furniture shopping, there are different types of bases. You see the round ones, or the ones that have almost the kind of the beams that run along the sides. Gives you the ability that on a natural stone patio, you can have a chair with maybe a little less wiggle. So in natural stone, really not permeable options either.
So for the permeable options, is it possible to do some kind of a hybrid where you have gaps that would have sand in between the stones that would make it permeable, or is that not classified?
Well, in order to be permeable, it's actually what's underneath the paver that's different. So in a typical patio that you would think of, whether it's poured concrete, pavers, or natural stone, we're going to put in Minnesota here about 6 inches of compacted road gravel underneath it. So that's the gravel that's got about 1 inch rock all the way down to just the fine dust. And you compact that so hard that water's not going to go through it. When you're dealing with a permeable application, what you have for rock is you have that 1 inch rock and they've washed it. So there's none of the fine material. So water, if you take a cup of water and you pour it through that, it's just going to drain right through. So the base is really the key to a permeable application, that it's a different type of base. Can you combine different pavers? Yes, but there are some limitations in the level of permeability that you're going to get when you use the specific pavers called permeable pavers. They actually have a little larger spacer on the side of the paver, so it creates a little wider gap between each paver, and that allows for that water infiltration. Go ahead.
I got the poured concrete. Can you put pavers over the poured concrete?
You can. Elevation, if it's right up against the house, you've got to worry about that. The other thing is if that poured concrete is cracked or it's settled in places, you can't just put pavers down and expect that to be a perfect finish. So usually in most cases, the best option is to rip that out, put in the right compacted base, and go from there. So, thinking about some design considerations, what uses will the patio have? Is it going to be for dining? Is it going to be for sitting out just relaxing, sitting in the sun, sitting in the shade? Some of those things you want to consider. If it's going to be a fire pit area, you've got to take into building code and fire code into account that fire pit needs to be far enough away from any combustible structure to meet code. Some of the thoughts there. You want to design your entire space before you just put a patio in. A lot of times we'll get called into a project after a patio has gone in and they want us for the planting advice. And there are some things that they missed along the process, whether it be controlling water in the space. Water is probably the biggest detriment to patios failing over time, any type of concrete. Water getting under them, even pouring on top of it. It's not, it takes a little bit, I mean, we're landscapers, it's not really expertise, but it's just experience that you build over time. You realize that there are certain things you have to consider when you're designing a patio. So thinking about the entire space before just putting the patio in play that'll help you make sure you get it sited right, so that at 4 o'clock when you're sitting there eating dinner, you're not in blasted sun. You might want to think about those things. So it's changing some things around a little bit, looking at that. In designing your landscaping, how can you complement the architecture of the house? Whether it be an arch on top of a door or a window that you can tie down into the patio, an angle or gable on the roof, something like that. How can you complement the architecture of the home with the landscaping to make it all look unified? Like I said with the fire pit, you want to choose that location that best matches the type of use for the patio. So getting it the proper distance away from combustible structures, or getting it into the sunlight at the time of day that you want to use it, or out of the sunlight at the time of day you want to use it, depending on what type of sun that is. You want to consider the elevation and the need for walls or stairs early on. A patio should be at about a 1 to 2% pitch. If you have more pitch than about a 2% pitch, what happens is you're sitting on it in the chair and you can feel that. So if you're in that 1 to 2% range, you're at a point where you're going to move water off of the patio, but you're not going to be too steep. If you go underneath that 1% range, here in Minnesota with all that snow sitting out there, you worry about that water draining the right way in the spring. So you want to consider that. And like I say there with elevation, need for walls or stairs, if you have a patio that you might need to add a stair to compared to what the lawn is, most lawns are going to have more pitch on them than a 1 or 2%. 1% pitch is basically 1 inch in 8 feet. So the floor in this room, probably 0 pitch on it, but if you, across the width of this room, if you only have 2 inches of pitch, you probably could hardly see that, but it will make sure that the water gets away. When you get to a flatter pitch like this, that water is necessarily not going to move off. Then you want to choose the material that best suits the use in the site. Like I said with the shoveling, if you have a patio that you want to shovel in the winter to use, it may be difficult to do if you're using natural stone. So you might want to consider some other materials on that. Then we're going to get into the poured concrete patios, and we'll start looking at projects now. Like I said earlier, you've got your plain concrete, the stamped concrete to add a little bit more detail to it. Usually that stamping, they put a stamping just on that surface layer that creates a little bit of a shape, whether it be a flagstone or a slate or something like that. They can usually have the ability to stamp a border onto things to add a little bit more interest to things. And then both of those can be colored. Now, stamping and coloring is going to increase the cost of any project. I've seen several stamp patio projects that by the time you add the stamping and the coloring to it, they end up costing as much or more than a paver project would. So not always going to be the most cost effective, but there are times when they are the most effective method, which we'll look at a project here in just a second. And then lastly, exposed aggregate. That's where you see the little rocks on the surface of the patio. What they do when they pour the concrete there is they actually wash that cream layer off at just a few hours after it goes down to expose that. With the stamped and the exposed aggregate, those are the patios that really do require that ceiling to hold up and look their best over time. First project here, just looking at a simple plain concrete patio. On this project, one of the things that we looked at is how can you make a plain concrete patio a little bit more unique than just throwing down a couple 2x4s and having a square rectangular space. So you can make curves or round forms with poured concrete. It's just the way that you form it up. So you can add a little bit of that to things. Here, if you can see that one in the evening, a couple things about that project. That's an exposed aggregate project, so you get a little bit of that unique kind of the texture and multicolor look to the surface, as well as their the fountain in the center. So it adds another piece to that patio. I'm not quite sure what that project is, but you've got the different benches, so that's kind of a little courtyard area there. And the addition of lighting extends the use of that patio into the evening. If you didn't have those lights there, that's a pretty dark space to go sit at that time of day. So those additions add a little bit of interest to it, as well as making it or a little bit more functional in the evenings. Here we see an exposed a stamped concrete patio where they've used the dye in two forms here. You've got the red both up on the stoop as well as down in the center, and then that beige color that is the border and the stairs. Nice that the beige color complements the stucco color of the house, so they're tying the landscape into the architecture there. And then the other piece in this case, if you're dealing with a stoop project, so if you're replacing a stoop off the back of your house, building code requires that that is on footings. And so in most cases, about the only way to do that is to start with pouring concrete. You can put pavers or stone over the top of that, but then you've got the added cost there too. So when you need to include footings in a project, sometimes going with poured concrete is going to be your most cost-effective and smart route and way to produce a long-term quality project. Looking at here, another stamped patio. You can kind of see in the stamp they've got the multiple sizes of the stone there that they're trying to mimic in that one, and simple color on that.
Is the dye right in the concrete?
So different, depending on the project, they'll do it a little differently. Sometimes they will throw it down on the top as just a powder and then kind of mix it into the cream, so it is only a thin surface. On that project that was two color, that would be pretty hard to order from the cement plant to have a color in there, and because you need to really pour that at one time. You can't pour those two, you know, they probably poured the stoop in that case at a separate time than they poured the patio, but that patio piece with the border on it probably needed to be poured at the same time. So in that case, my guess would be they threw some powder down, mixed it into the cream to be able to do that. But you can get that color straight from the plant. It just does have a little bit of limitations on things sometimes. The other piece to that color, and I'm not an installer of them, but I've been told that when you order it from the plant, it is sometimes harder to get the exact color that you want. When you're mixing it on site, you just have a little bit more control over it to throw that on the surface. So it all comes with experience. We'll move into the paver category of things here. So you've got your clay pavers, far more traditional, been around for many, many years. Concrete pavers, a little bit newer. You're going to have more style options when it comes to the concrete pavers. Clay pavers, just because of what they are, tend to be a little bit more limited in the manufacturing process and how they do things. So you've got a little bit simpler on the style, but you can do combinations of things to add some interest to a clay patio. In the, like I said, the unlimited styles and colors, definitely in the concrete pavers, there's new styles every year, new colors, you can have something unique. But there are some that have been around for 25, 30 years and still keep proving themselves to be a style that people like to see. So in order to have your space a little bit unique, we'll look at some things in upcoming slides here that will show you how to make a patio that might have the exact same material as your neighbor a little bit more unique by adding some banding in or some different colors. And then, like I said earlier, the permeable option is present in the pavers. Here we're starting out with just a simple clay paver patio, kind of a classic 4x8 Holland paver. You see the border on things, they call this a soldier course, so you don't want to end up with small cuts right on the edge. They tend to fall out, so that's why you put just about as close as you can get to a full paver on the edges. That holds things in, and through the process of the installation, you lock all the edges into place. Here another simple clay paver project. Like that other one, you see the pattern in this is just called running bond, where you just line the pavers up, and usually, just like the bricks on the wall of the house, you kind of stagger those seams on every other row a little bit to give that. But the clay pavers, Most of the time you're going to end up in tones with some red in it. It's just kind of natural with that. There are some that are kind of more beiges and get into the browns, but usually it's just a little bit of red just because that is what the natural material tends to be. First concrete paver project that we're going to look at here, and in this one, some of the stuff that I look at with the design is that the designer, he's kind of created that little niche space, that little outdoor room where he's surrounded by the planter wall on the left side of the picture, and then on the right side you've got the water feature, and actually in the center of that water feature that's a fire, gas fire feature. So designing the space, it's more than just a patio. It includes the things around it so that you have, you know, a sense of a room that you're sitting in. You can kind of see on that one, it looks like that the border color is possibly a little bit different color than the pattern as well. A lot of times that adds a little bit of interest. Here we move into just a very simple fire pit patio. This is a circle kit. I don't know if you've seen circle kits before. They are about the most cost-effective way of getting something other than a square in a patio. When that comes out, there's not more than 2 or 3 cuts that need to be done to make that whole patio. And so saving on that cutting is going to save on labor costs for you and be able to get things in. Here's another project just involving a fireplace, and this one sitting by the lakeside. The hillside here actually came down basically to the lakeside, so incorporating a retaining wall allowed us to get that patio in that space. And not really easy to see in the picture there, but that is a large paver in that case. The smallest size there is 5 by 11. Largest size is 16 by 18. So if you think of 16 by 18, get its large size, really trying to mimic more of that natural stone, but at a price point much lower. Here's a very elaborate project. In this case, it includes many different beautiful design details from Daryl. He's incorporated the banding color in here to blend throughout, give a little bit of interest to things. Here you can see the circle detail around the corner of the pool, also up underneath the table next to the bar. He's got the circle. So that combination of elements to things just adds a lot to the design versus everything just being one uniform piece across, you know, probably looking at 500 square feet in just that picture. So that project, you know, might have been double that. If you just had that much pavement without any character to it, it gets a little bit boring. So that's what he's done in that case, is add some of those elements. Here's a little bit simpler patio, but some of the uniqueness of this design that I like is what he's done on the border here. He's got that double row border where he's incorporated, and it's actually, the size paver is actually in the patio here, but on the border he's used a solid color versus the pattern in the center that it's a blended color. So there, again, adds a little bit of uniqueness and character where it might not, might be the same material as what's just down the street, but it's going to stand out a little different in your yard. And again, on a price point, that paver right there is actually on the lower end. So you get a little, you know, quite a bit of character out of something like that for a material cost that's down on the lower end of things. Here, just a simple front yard patio. So not every patio needs to be in the backyard. Maybe it's sitting out to watch the kids get on the bus and have a cup of coffee. Here we've incorporated, again, simple, low-cost circle because not a single cut to make in that project. Just a little 6-foot diameter space, a couple chairs and a little bistro table lets them sit outside, front door, socialize with the neighbors, and then it ties in with what we've got going to the front door. In this picture here, you see the use of some sitting walls. So number one, those are going to kind of make the space a little bit more intimate where you're not just falling off into the entire yard. You can see there's a couple steps off of there. So the slope of the yard probably required them to flatten things out. So rather than just having a 16-inch drop off the side of the patio, they've got that sitting wall there. Creates a little bit of a buffer. Hopefully, you know, people aren't going to fall off the edge. And then it also helps create that room. One other thing in this picture that I look at is a lot of times this type of little bump out on the window there, it doesn't actually go down to the ground, so you've got kind of a little dead space under there and it just looks pretty awkward. And in terms of putting properly compacted base under there to do a patio surface, it's impossible. So he's added that little wall there that just kind of screens off that space, and it also just matches with the walls that he's got going on around the outside of the patio. Here we've got a concrete paver for the majority of what you see, and then that banding in there, he's actually used the clay paver. So adds a lot of uniqueness to the project by having that kind of glossy maroon clay to that. Some of the other design elements you see there with cutting in those arcs, rounding the corners, they do add a little bit to the cost, but they do make the project, more unique. So. Here looking at an extremely large fireplace and just a kind of a nice little space in front of it there with that table. But one of the things that I look at with this picture again is the use of the sitting walls around it. If you didn't have that wall there, that space would just feel enormous down into that large yard. So he's used the sitting walls to just cozy up that space a little bit. The other piece there is those lights allow you to use that patio a little bit later into the evening. Here's another project. In this case here, I look at that with 3 different outdoor rooms. You've got that main room up by the house there. You have the dining table, a little extra seating there. Then you've got that little gas fire pit area there. You can go down and sit in that space. And then off to the left, underneath the pergola, you've got the hot tub. So the combination of rooms, he's repeated the same type of design through it. Some of the things you see with the little corner notches of that banding. And then the other thing that I like about this project is how he's tied it in with the house is the color of the paver in this banding matches the trim on the house. So pulling again that architecture down into the patio, how can you make those features complement each other?
Are the sitting walls just stacked pavers?
That's a retaining wall block product. So typically you wouldn't just stack pavers. There's different products for it, and if you're trying to do that, usually those retaining wall block products are going to be a little bit cheaper than what it would cost you to do it with pavers. So. But between all the different manufacturers, I mean, we're lucky to have, we've got 5 or 6 or more manufacturers right here in the Twin Cities of these things. It's easy to find complementary products between walls and patios, and they're products that are going to last in our environment, so that's important. Same project here, and one of the things I wanted to show with this is a concrete paver, but you see the texture on that and how it actually really mimics a natural stone, and it mimics a bluestone material very well. So on the cost side, it is a higher cost material for a concrete paver, but compared to a natural stone, you save on the labor because every paver is, in this case, 2 3/4 inches thick. If you're dealing with natural stone, you might have one piece that's 1 inch thick, one piece that's 1 1/2. So you're adding a lot to the labor when you deal with those types of things. Another concrete paver project. Here you see some of that forethought on the elevation changes. If they would have just put that patio in without this step here, or not considering the step out the back of the door, you're going to end up having to put a lot of pitch on that. It's going to make it harder to sit on. So it's important for a designer to go in beforehand and get the elevations, find out what it is, and find out what you're going to need to do so that when they're out there putting it in, it's not a guessing game. You want to have that pinned down so that the project actually goes smoothly, turns out right, and you're going to get the best finish in the end. The other piece that you see in there is the pergola over the top of that patio. I'm not quite sure about that project, but if at 5 o'clock that's in full sun, it's hard to use a patio a lot of times when at 5 o'clock it's in full sun midsummer. So add a little bit of shade with the pergola there can help make a patio a little bit more useful on some of those hot days. Here another simple circular form just for a fire pit. In that case, one of the things we did is we need a little bit of retaining on the back side of things. So we just used some really large boulders to do that. That also adds, a couple of these that are tucked behind the hydrangea here are flat top, like that kind of first one you see with the flatter top there in the middle. And so that allows for just a little bit extra seating when you've got more than a few people around, just some functional seating built into the project. Here's another concrete paver project, and this one, I look at the forethought that went into how furniture was going to lay out on it, and some of what he's done with this little bump out here just allows space for that table, doesn't push the whole patio out another, whatever that is, 16 inches. So it allows you to have more grass space, but gives you the functional space to use the table, to be able to walk behind it. And the other thing that I think it does is it just adds a lot of element to it versus just running this straight across here. Just that simple little bump out adds a little bit little bit of labor for something like that because you've got to cut those pavers along the curve there, but not really a hard thing to do and adds a lot to a project. Here's another concrete paver that's really meant to mimic a flagstone. So in this case, you get a very uniform surface. One of the things that we did in that project is this center grouping of pavers is actually 3 different colors of pavers mixed together. So to add a little bit more uniqueness to it, rather than just getting 1 pallet of pavers, we ordered up 3 different colors, brought them out, and then mixed it together on site, so we gave a little bit more character to things. The other piece of that is we've gone with a different style paver as the border on that, just to set things off, give it a nice clean edge. Here's a patio underneath a deck. We get a lot of calls for people that are looking for patios underneath decks. One of the first things I ask is, do you really want to be, when you're outside, do you really want to sit under your deck? Now in this case, you kind of see on the cliff on the upper left corner of the picture that the backyard really doesn't look to be very big. So I think that might have been the only option if they were going to have some patio space other than the deck, is to go underneath it there. And so that's where they've gone on that route. Got the circle, a semicircle put in front of the door there, adds a little bit of interest. The other piece then being is that banding of pavers in there to add a little bit more color interest to the project. Another banding in this project, you see that red paver running through the center there. So the main part of the patio is a concrete paver, that red paver is a clay paver. If you can see it in the picture, this dark red color complements that dark red trim of the windows. So you're pulling elements out of the house again, adding it down into the landscape. Here's a beautiful outdoor room, truly I think what signifies an outdoor room. Kind of set off on its own. You've got the pergola, the fire pit, just a nice cozy environment with that furniture in place there and the plantings around it. Other thing that I look at with this project is they've combined, he's actually used a bullnose clay material for the step treads, used that as a paver in this banding, and then it also fits as the coping of the pool down on the bottom left corner there. So tying that different material into different places provides a lot of interest in things. Simple circle fire pit patio surrounded by the plantings. In this case, they're just using a fire pit that's a portable. I like to encourage people to do that versus built-ins because it makes your patio multi-purpose. When you want to have just a dining table out there, you need to entertain more people, you don't have a hole in the center. So allows you to use that patio for more things than just a fire pit space. Here's a project I did a couple of years ago in the fall, and some of what we looked at here is, again, that's one of those pavers that a little tougher to see, but it really is meant to mimic a natural stone material. The color in the paver has a little bit of a blend to complement the shake on the house. And then the border that we've used on that is actually, that's the patio that they had prior to us doing that, and that's actually a street paver. So somewhere when they tore a street out, they had those. The old patio was pretty well disintegrated and they wanted a little bit more space, but we wanted to reuse that material, add some character, keep the history of the house in place. Here you see a concrete project, concrete pavers with the banding. They've got the borders in that solid color. Also nice to set off the step tread with that border and adding that solid color to keep that functional purpose there of signifying that there's an elevation change. Added the detail in of some of the banding through the center of it. And then actually in that space underneath the table there, the patio part that's under the table is where all the water on that patio is designed to flow to, and that's a permeable area underneath that. So your question about can you combine things? Yes, you can. In this case, they couldn't, with the elevation on the site, they couldn't get the water off the site properly without doing something like that. So when they are designed properly and installed properly, those types of surfaces actually they'll function well even in early March when the ground's frozen. That type of a permeable application does function in Minnesota. Here's a project I did last fall. Some of the things I looked at when I got out to this house is how dark the stone was on the house here and how can we complement that in the landscaping. So you can see what we did in the wall as well as just the banding in the patio. bringing that dark color down in just to help tie the landscaping to what they've got going on already on the house. Here's another large-scale project. Got the fire pit over on the left side there. If you see in the kind of the back side behind it, it's like a built-in couch. So he's used the sitting wall with actually raising another wall up behind that to help screen out the intersection that's in the back there. The waterfall close by to that patio space also helps, quiet down some of that road noise that you've got going on. One of the last couple concrete paver projects we're going to look at here, just a simple fire pit area. Some of what we've done in this case is we left it square to cut down on the cutting, so cost effective. We've got the space. Still a nice design element. Not every patio has to have curves to it, so we've got the square piece there. Then we've added that sitting wall, so they're actually on that patio. They do have a few chairs that they use, but the majority of the seating on the back sides of things there is they just sit on the wall. They're teenage kids. They probably don't sit on chairs most of the time anyways. They'd rather be doing something else. So, and then another, again, going back to that, keeping things cost effective, a simple paver patio, the circle kit. You saw in the last project with those sitting walls, so it's pretty easy to take a sitting wall straight along just about any patio. When you're dealing with building sitting walls, you need to plan ahead for what radius that circle is going to be so that you can build a seating wall without having to cut every block. Not every freestanding sitting wall block is going to be able to make a curve. So if you plan the radius of the circle at the right size, it'll allow you to save some cost on that wall if you've got a material that works with that radius. We'll move on to the natural stone patios. So when you're thinking of natural stone, usually it's going to be flagstone or what they call cut and patterned. So cut and patterned is going to be, you're going to have squares and rectangles matched together. That flagstone is that irregular form. It needs to be puzzle pieced on the site. Flagstone is going to be by far the most costly labor on any patio project. It truly is an art form to go out there and see the stone, put it in place, and to tighten up those joints where you don't have big gaps in things. We'll look at a couple projects down the road here. A 1-inch joint on a flagstone patio adds about 50% more labor than what a 2-inch joint is, because you've got to do so much more work to get all those joints tight. So you'll see some of those options. That also then makes a difference in how that, the functionality of a patio is. You tighten up the joint, and yes, you have a higher potential of being able to put a shovel across the surface of it. The wider those joints, the better the chance that a shovel edge is going to catch on something. A lot of times with natural stone, if you've got stone on your house, we can actually use a matching or the same type of stone down in a patio. So that's a nice thing you can do with natural stone. And then some of what you'll see in these projects is that they're actually combining a lot of multiple types of things just to provide interest to them. So, first one we're going to look at here, this is again that type cut and patterned. And so you see the blue stone here. You've got the squares, the rectangles all combined together to fit that form. It comes from the quarry that way, so you're dealing with that. You've got minimal cutting on site to actually make the pattern work. You've got to cut along the edges a lot of times. And then you see on the bottom of the picture how he's expanded the joint, and there's a ground cover in those. A lot of people request that. It's a hard thing to do in Minnesota. It would be wonderful if it wasn't, but with our climate, it's tough. It's a tough little thing, so it takes some extra work digging out. You need base underneath the stones, but then you need to dig that base out in that joint and get the right amount of dirt in there so that those plants can survive. Also takes a lot of patience. When you're putting those little plants in, it might be 3-4 years before they've filled in to fill that joint. So you can do it quicker with sod if you're looking at that, but usually a sod joint needs to be closer to 4 to 6 inches before you're going to be able to get good survival out of it. Here's a flagstone patio, and you see, in a flagstone, this is one type of stone, but you get that variety of color in it, so some uniqueness there. The joints on that project are one that I would say I'd consider that about a 2-inch joint. So save a little bit on labor from some of the upcoming ones that you see, and you get that uniqueness. There are some things you can do with the joints other than just sand. Try to get the materials to hold in there. Polymeric joint sand is one. I don't know if anybody's heard anything about that. Mortar doesn't work in joints in Minnesota because there is so much movement. So unless you pour basically a 12-inch slab of concrete and then adhere the stone to that slab with mortar, which you're going to probably pay 3 times or more the cost for that type of patio than another one, mortar is not going to work. So in Minnesota, we've got some limitations on what we can do in those joints just because of frost. Here you see the real tight joints. So in this case, very labor intensive. They've gone through, kept it looking natural. You know, the pieces of stone, they don't all look like they've been cut into squares and rectangles so much. And so very labor intensive to get those joints that tight. Here's another project. Tighter joints, not quite as tight as the last one, but a lot of work to do that with this type of stone. Other thing that you see there is he's incorporated a banding with a different type of stone here. Definitely adds to the labor, but a project like that, I mean, it really stands out and it complements, again, what he's used as boulders on the retaining portion of things there. Here again, another cut and pattern project. Here he's gone with the banding, the concentric circles, and the material that he's used for the banding here is actually a little bit easier to use for the banding than the last picture. The last picture, each of those stones that made the banding had to be cut. This is a material we can get right from the quarry at that dimension. So there is some cutting kind of on end to end between the pieces, but you're not cutting both sides of every one. So you've got some little bit of cost effectiveness there. The other piece you see, they've incorporated those boulders into the patio just for some extra, whether it's seating or a spot to set a drink, something like that. It ties into the fire pit, and then you could also incorporate those boulders up into your planting beds or that space. Here's another cut and patterned project. This type of stone here is Minnesota dolomite or Mankato Kasota stone. Some of the historic buildings through St. Paul and in Minneapolis have a lot of that stone on the building. And some of what's going on in this project is they've used basically the same stone but in a different form on both the retaining walls and the fire pit. And then I don't know that it's exactly the same stone, but a very complementary stone on the waterfall and the other boulders that are in the picture there. So the cut and pattern form of this, again, it comes from the quarry, so you're putting it together. This material, actually, the quarry cuts all of that material, so it is all a consistent thickness, but your material cost on that type of a stone is very high. And another downfall of this type of patio is this stone will deteriorate very quickly if you put any salt on it. So you want to avoid salt on some of these things. Pavers are actually probably going to have the best tolerance of salt of any of the types of patios because the actual density of the concrete paver is about 3 times of what poured concrete is. Natural stone, certain ones will tolerate salt a little better, but this is one that doesn't hold up well to salt, so you got to consider that in the winter. Here again you see a little combination project. You've got the pattern paver, pattern of the patio is flagstone, that multicolor, that is just one variety of stone, but it comes from the quarry with that much variation in it. He's incorporated the clay paver as the accent there, and then on the outside, it's basically the same type of stone here, but they've bought it in the cut and pattern form and used it, so adds a complementary piece to things there. Here's another cut and pattern. This is called full color bluestone. It's a very popular type of material. This is one of the most wide variations of it that I've seen on a project. So some of it, when you're picking out a material, it makes sense rather than just sign the paperwork and expect the landscaper to show up with what you want, to actually go out to the stone yard and see what you're getting. Pick out the exact pallets so that you get the material that actually matches what you want, because you could ask for full color bluestone and get something that's far different than this. So when you're picking out natural stone of any type, you really do want to go see it firsthand, and if you can put your name right on a pallet, that's going to be your best option. Here again, another flagstone patio. Some of what I look at with this picture is how large those pieces of stone are. Definitely adds to the labor on things, and also usually when you're buying those larger pieces, some of these pieces are probably 3-4 feet, you're paying a little bit more for the stone versus something that comes out that's 16 inches. It can you can throw around pretty easy with one person. These ones usually at a 2-inch thickness, you're dealing with 2 or 3 people per stone to get it set in properly and at the right level. So they've complemented the patio with those sitting boulders around it and also tied some of that stone into that built-in fire pit there. Another beautiful outdoor room, cut and pattern bluestone. So we looked at that picture a couple slides ago with the cut and pattern bluestone. Again, picking out the exact stone that you want. If you're looking for it, it makes sense to go find it because there is such a wide variety on projects. Here again, the pergola helps to create a little bit more of a room effect. And then she's used what Allison calls a faux fireplace in this project. If you're looking for a fire feature, a lot of times if you're looking at getting a fireplace built in, you're probably in the starting point of about $10,000. Project like this, I think she had a budget on that fire pit closer to $5,000. So she got that a permanent built-in structure that adds a lot of character to that project. The last flagstone that we're going to look at here, again, here he's combined multiple types of flagstone in the center pattern, as well as that red clay paver, and then the cut and pattern version on the outside. So versus just one solid surface, it provides a lot of interest. Not quite sure what the thought is with the circle in the center there, whether that's a spot to put a fountain or what that might be, but it definitely adds a little bit of uniqueness to the project. And then that's all I've got for projects today. If anybody is looking, if they'd like a copy of the slideshow of this, just to see some of the pictures at home, I've got some handouts in the back. My email, if you contact me, I will be happy to forward a slideshow along to you so you can keep looking at these projects. Our website, bachmanslandscaping.com, the majority of these projects are up on there. Like I said at the beginning, there's 11 of us designers out working on these types of projects. We're year-round at the planning process, and as soon as we can in the spring, we're going to get out and work on them, but we also don't want to rush that because we want projects to last many, many years. So, any questions? Well, thank you very much. I appreciate everybody coming out.